you all. Thanks again to Sean Don and John Pomfret for our first panel, our first discussion. I think that was a great table setting, looking at the history of the relationship and giving us a sense of where we are now. Now we're going to get into some of the real meaty policy conversations that we was famous for. Very grateful for Dorothy Dwoskin, a WIDA board member from Microsoft, who's agreed to moderate this panel. Per standard, we'll turn it over to Dorothy to do. Everyone's got the bios in their packet, so I don't think we have to have lengthy introductions. We'll have a nice discussion and then Q&A with the audience.
Okay.
Sorry.
Now it's on. Okay. So, first of all, thank you all for joining the panel. Thank you for all of your interest. I think there's been a lot of activity around town in the last couple of weeks about preparing reports and recommendations about what the incoming administration should do about China. Melanie worked on the Asia Society report that was released last week. If you haven't read it, you should. I would also recommend to you that CSIS released its paper about reinvigorating the U.S. economic strategy in the Asia Pacific. So it's fair to say that everybody has an opinion. I don't know if it's yesterday's leftovers, but everybody is looking at a menu of options about what we might do in our relationship with China in the coming days. I think for me, as I started to do a little work to prepare for the panel, it was really notable that the comments from all quarters has been the need for a rebalance in the relationship with China. And that even some of China's most stalwart supporters over the years are raising questions about the state of U.S.-China relations and what can be done. So what I hope we do this morning is to surface some of the challenges, but also talk a little bit about the solutions and strategies that folks are talking about, so that as we all go back to our offices and create our own menus, that we can do it on an informed basis. I think the assumption is that the administration is working on its own list of ideas. So each of our guests will have an opportunity to speak, and then we can have a conversation amongst panelists, and then we'll get to some Q&A. So Rob Scott has done a tremendous amount of work on China issues and manufacturing, and I know folks have seen his publications, and WIDA has circulated them twice in the last week. So Rob, welcome, and thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the introduction, the opportunity to be here. I do have a recent paper on China trade that I think has been circulated, and I'll talk about that here today. I want to talk about three issues: what the impacts of China and China trade are on the domestic economy, and in particular I want to emphasize the imbalance in that relationship, what's driving that imbalance, number two, and number three, what we can do about it. So that's where I want to go with this. Before I start, I should thank my RA, Zane Kuiper. You can wave your hand. Zane is responsible for all the numbers in this. I can't add. I've lost that connection. So thank you very much, Zane. So growing bilateral trade deficits have eliminated 3.4 million U.S. jobs since China entered the WTO in 2001, with job losses in every state and all 435 congressional districts. Nearly three-quarters, or 2.6 of those 3.4 million, were good jobs with excellent wages and benefits in U.S. manufacturing industries. Second, although growing exports to China support some domestic jobs, rising imports from China have cost many more. We've lost all those jobs. Contrary to claims of proponents of China's entry into the WTO, the U.S. trade deficit with that country has more than quadrupled between 2001 and 2015, rising from $83 billion in 2001 to $367 billion in 2015. But growing trade deficits and job losses are just the tip of the iceberg. Lost jobs they're just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to evaluating the negative impact of China's trade and industrial policies on workers and manufacturers in the United States. Rising trade deficits directly cost U.S. workers $37 billion in lost wages alone in 2011. In addition, workers displaced from those industries making imports were paid even more than those in export competing industries, contrary to popular myth. And they earned $10,000 a year less when reemployed in services and other non-traded goods industries. But growing imports from China and other low-wage countries also drove down wages for all similar workers in the economy. And this is really the big part of the iceberg that we don't see and what most economists don't talk about. And this includes essentially all non-college educated workers who make up nearly 70% of the workforce, 100 million workers in total who lost about $1,800 a year on average in 2011 alone. This transferred about $180 billion, or 1% of GDP, from working families to corporate profits and to the incomes of those at the very top, the corporate managers and others in the top 10%. And it is the pernicious effects of these lost jobs and wages, I think, which best explains the populist revolt that swept the country in last year's election. That's the impact of China trade. What are the reasons for this growing disparity between the U.S. and China? China both subsidizes and dumps massive quantities of exports. It blocks imports, pirates software, and technology from foreign producers, and invests in a massive amount of excess production capacity in a range of industries. Extensive government subsidies and the rapid growth of state-owned enterprises have generated a massive buildup of excess capacity in more than 20 industries, including steel, aluminum, machinery, rubber and plastics, stone, cement, glass, and renewable industries such as solar cells and windmills and so on. And this capacity far exceeds demand for these products in China's domestic economy, which has led to a massive surge of dumping of these products in the U.S. and other markets. China also operates, as we've heard, as a refuse lot for carbon and other industrial pollutants, putting downward pressure on industrial standards around the world, and it provides another indirect subsidy to exports from China. And last but not least, China has engaged in extensive and sustained currency manipulation, which has resulted in persistent currency misalignment, and those two are very different. We can talk about it in Q&A, resulting in large and growing trade surpluses with the U.S. and the world over the past 20 years. Well, I'm about out of time. I will say I think there are three things that I think we can do to respond. One, greatly enhance enforcement of fair trade standards, perhaps with self-initiation of trade cases. Two, I think we need to engage in very tough negotiations to reduce this massive amount of excess capacity that China has built up in basic industries. And number three, I think we have to tackle currency misalignment. This is a major problem, and we need to put in place large incentives to make that happen. And I will talk about how we can do that perhaps in the Q&A. So thank you.
So I completely agree with Rob. The U.S.-China trade and investment relationship is, whatever word you want to use, unbalanced, non-reciprocal. A lot of experts, businesses, workers, think tank people have noticed that, particularly under Xi Jinping's leadership, the signals could not be more clear that China is basically rejecting the premise that we based our welcome of China into the WTO on, which was that as China reached the higher levels of development and developed a massive consumer market, that market would be open to U.S. companies, U.S. goods, export services, and that would help to offset some of the pain that American workers felt when U.S. manufacturing jobs started moving to China in the 1990s. That's not really happening. It's definitely not happening in large enough scale, largely because the Chinese leaders in Beijing decided they would like to dominate the consumption markets as well, and on the one hand, dominate the low-cost export manufacturing side, and as their consumers buy more goods, they want them buying Chinese, not American. And so we're not getting the deal that we thought we were getting, and that raises into question, what can we do to push back against that? I think absolutely the U.S. needs to respond and respond more firmly than we have recently. Throughout the Obama administration, my personal sense is that the U.S. was adjusting to this new reality, recognizing that China has shifted its path. It's using new tools that we didn't have before. We're getting new data, such as Rob's, on what the actual impacts are. U.S. companies are reassessing what their prospects are in the Chinese market. We're seeing new actions with companies like Microsoft that we probably wouldn't have expected before, with anti-monopoly laws and other non-tariff barriers that our current trade system really isn't constructed to address. And so we need to see less talk, more action from the U.S. Completely agree, boost enforcement. Where we have actual rules that China is violating, why aren't we enforcing them? I think a lot of that comes down to resources. I know USTR has to make a lot of tough decisions about which cases to take on. American companies are in a really difficult place, because if you have a presence in China and you are thinking about fighting back against discriminatory regulatory practices, you have to accept the fact that that could eliminate your ability to operate in that market at all if China takes tit-for-tat retaliation. And so a lot of American CEOs are put in a really difficult position. You know, do you fight against these principles to protect your bottom line 5 years from now, or do you take a more keep your head down approach so that you keep the current growth rate and jobs that you have? It's a really difficult position, and we need to see the U.S. government taking more of a role in bringing these cases forward, and that's going to require more resources. So for an administration that says they want to get tough on China and tough on trade, I'd like to see where the money is in terms of actually boosting this country's ability to do that. Secondly, where we don't have rules, we need them. The tech sector. We negotiated the WTO before the tech sector existed. Things like semiconductors and cross-border data transfer. This is a Wild West. There are not rules governing the things that most concern American companies and most put American innovation at risk. So we should be very serious and innovative about how to bring Chinese counterparts to the table to create those rules. My personal opinion is that where we don't have rules at the moment, we might need to be tactical in figuring out how to convince Chinese counterparts that the U.S. is much more serious about this than we have been in the past. We might want to creatively look at, for example, in the tech sector, are there things we can do with CFIUS or levers that we have to take action on tech in areas where we might not have the perfect rules for specific Chinese behavior on the Chinese market side. Where systemic problems exist, we need systemic solutions. The Chinese government is deploying strategies to dominate entire industrial sectors, but we're going piecemeal, whack-a-mole at small pieces of the problem. Semiconductors, I would recommend as being the first problem out of the gate. We see the Chinese government putting forward tremendous amounts of money to fund the acquisition of a major international value chain. You can't expect U.S. companies to deal with this issue on a case-by-case basis. An American semiconductor firm that's looking at going out of business and trying to do the best by its workers and its investors, their incentive is to take a Chinese deal if that's the best deal they could get. But we need to have the U.S. government looking at these issues from a broad industrial competitiveness angle to see if we need to be taking action perhaps from a national security standpoint or other standpoints to make sure that we aren't missing the boat on some of these challenges. We also need to be looking at trade broadly and make sure that you're not supporting U.S. companies on one side and then hitting them in the other. Climate is a big example here. The U.S. is a signatory to the Paris Climate Agreement. The IEA estimates that the Paris Agreement is going to stimulate $13 trillion in renewable energy investments around the world over the next 15 years. We don't want to overlook that global market. So we want to push this administration to be thinking about when they're making decisions about things like climate agreements and what the U.S. position will be on them. Very critical from a climate perspective, but don't overlook the business perspective either. I think we saw in the Bush administration how American businesses can be hit in overseas markets when the U.S. takes an approach on climate that isn't seen around the world as being a good approach. And so that's something we should think about very carefully. And I think we also need to remember, while we are facing the losses American workers are dealing with, the hits to American companies, we cannot forget that at the end of the day, the U.S. benefits from a connected global market. The The U.S. benefits from trade with China when that trade is occurring on a level playing field. We have 10 million U.S. jobs based on exports. We have 300,000 small businesses that depend on access to global markets. I'm particularly worried when we hear about, Mr. Navarro talking about unwinding and repatriating global supply chains. We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater here. What we want to do is we want to have trade, but we want to have trade in a way that benefits American companies and American workers. My personal belief is that we can make that happen. We just need to be stronger and more forward-looking with American policy. And lastly, we don't want to make the mistake of treating China like a black box. That's something that's worrying me with some of these statements that I've seen with Mr. Navarro and some of the other voices that are speaking for the new administration. There are different interests within China. We want to know how those interests push Beijing in one way or another. We want to work with the different interests within China, find ways to work with them, not necessarily always against them. I think we want to keep an eye on the tactic that was just tried at putting the one China policy on the negotiation table. That was never something that China was going to negotiate over, and so that did not benefit American interests in any way that I can see. It probably drained some of the political capital that we had with the new administration. I personally see the same concern with something like the proposals to block all Chinese SOEs through CFIUS. China isn't going to stop having SOEs. So I question where that tactic would get us. Rather, we want to be much more focused, look at specific Chinese policies that are a problem for U.S. businesses, target specific sectors, specific policies, try to figure out what are the Chinese reformers and companies that are actually on our side on some of these issues. We have new Chinese companies that have their own IPR, and they're very concerned about IPR enforcement in China. We have private Chinese companies, we have reformers in China that are very concerned about overcapacity in steel and aluminum and other sectors. We want to be following very closely what are the debates within China on their own domestic economic reforms. How can we dock into that process with the changes that we want to see from an American perspective and find ways to work with some of the incentives in China and not always completely opposed to them. And just as a final note, I've spent a lot of time working on climate issues, energy and climate issues with China. I see where we are right now with China on trade as analogous to where we were with China on climate in 2009 when the US and China clashed at the Copenhagen Climate Conference. It looked like it was a zero-sum issue, that we weren't going to be able to make progress. It looked like our interests were opposed, but by being firm on our principles, knowing what our national interests were, and also being willing to engage China and try to find areas of common ground where we could move forward, we completely turned that issue around. So I'm currently very concerned about where this relationship is. I think we need a complete stock taking and reassessment and new direction in our policy toward China, but I also think that if we do that correctly, we can bring this around and hopefully, as we do on climate, get things to a much more positive path that's better for the United States and better for China as well.
Thank you. I'm Clay Lowery. I'm going to change it up a little bit. First of all, thank you very much for having me. Rob, Melanie obviously talked about some broad issues and big concerns in a variety of areas. An area that has been mentioned a lot during the campaign, Rob mentioned in his one point, is the idea of currency manipulation. And currency manipulation as a trade issue. So I thought I'll talk a little bit about that. What does it really mean for China, and also just currency in general. I'm going to back up, though, and not just talk about China. So we had Janet Yellen was testifying yesterday, and she made a very good point, which is currency is much more than just a trade issue. Currency is about monetary policy, it's about fiscal policy, it's about what does an economy look like, how do the markets react. It's not just a trade issue. So when we think about currency manipulation, it's supposed to be about trade, because otherwise all those other points get lost. So if you look around the world, there's only a few countries that actually don't intervene in their currency markets. The United States, Europe, for the last 6 years, Japan, and the United Kingdom, and then a few others, and that's about it. So everybody Almost every country in the world intervenes in their currency markets. Almost every day. So it can't be just about intervening in currency, you have to make some, or otherwise it would be ludicrous. Everybody would be a currency manipulator. So you have to have some definitions around it. So usually what we talk about is doing currency manipulation in order to gain a trade advantage. So during the campaign, and a little bit as president, President Trump has been very clear that he believes China is a currency manipulator. He also said he thinks that Japan may be a currency manipulator. Peter Navarro suggested maybe Germany is a currency manipulator. So I'm not sure, so we have to figure out what is the definition of currency manipulation. Now we had a Trump advisor during the campaign and as part of the transition, Dan D'Amico, he was quoted the other day, I'm going to read this to you. It doesn't matter if Chinese authorities are manipulating the yuan by weakening it or manipulating it to strengthen it. Either way, they are doing it for their own advantage. So either way, they're manipulating. So if they do one thing, making it go up, it's manipulation. If they do another thing, make it go down, it's manipulation. Okay, so if that's the case, there's only two types of currency regimes that China could adopt in order to stop itself from being accused of being a manipulator, at least by Dan D'Amico, which is one, to be a purely floating exchange rate, so totally market-driven, such as the dollar, or two, to be a totally fixed exchange rate. So a totally fixed exchange rate would be something like a currency board, or you tie yourself to another currency, or the gold standard, or something like that. Another advisor for President Trump, who was also on the transition team, Judy Shelton, had a currency manipulation op-ed in the Wall Street Journal the other day. And she was on the news yesterday, and she essentially said that actually quantitative easing that Japan is doing is also currency manipulation. In fact, she said that almost every central bank in the world, including the Federal Reserve, is manipulating the currency. All right, so if you take the definitions that these folks have been saying, I'm not exactly sure how you cannot be accused of currency manipulation outside of a country like Ecuador, which has no monetary policy, it just follows the dollar. So Ecuador is not a currency manipulator, everybody else is. So that doesn't really make sense. So what we might want to do is come back to what is the definition. And so the definition that we have in law in the United States, and actually is that currency manipulation in order to gain a trade advantage. So, what does that mean? Donald Trump once has said during the campaign, as have many other people in the past, I want the Treasury Department, and Steve Mnuchin is now in the Treasury, to name China a currency manipulator. So, one, what is it based on? What is the evidence for that? And two, if that is the case, what do we do about it? So the evidence has always been tough for Treasury under the 1988 Omnibus Act, because you had to come up with a way of trying to figure out what is the intent of the Chinese. And trying to read intent is a hard thing to do. So in 2015, Congress passed a new bill that basically provided some criteria for Treasury to use. And so we saw that in 2016, Treasury actually measured a number of countries, including China, against the criteria that were set out by Congress. And China actually became one of 5 countries that was put on a watch list by Treasury. And then when Treasury put out its second report, China was now one of 6 countries, although actually it only failed one of the thresholds that Treasury set out. So there were 3 thresholds. Treasury said that 5 countries missed 2 of those thresholds. On the second round, a 6th country got added, Switzerland, and one country actually dropped down from missing 2 thresholds to missing 1 threshold. That was actually China. But if they are a manipulator, you would have to change the thresholds that Treasury set out, which you can do. And then what would the results be? So the first result is that we would basically, after we've called you a manipulator, we will get into a very tough negotiation with you. And we'll have a real discussion about currency issues. Now, some would say that that's what the Treasury's been doing for the last 10 years. So that's basically what we would do. But in the new law, there are some penalties in there. And some of those penalties are actually quite tough, particularly like countries like Japan and others. They pretty much don't do anything on a country like China. So you get into the next issue. What could you do? During the campaign, Wilbur Ross suggested, and he's about to become the Secretary of Commerce, then we could use countervailing duties. Now, we saw a Wall Street Journal report on that the other day. The idea would be is that if China is considered a manipulator, whether by the Treasury Department or by you could be initiated by industry for commerce, then you could actually put on a duty. Now, the first question is this WTO compliant? In other words, is currency manipulation a subsidy? Now, I'm not a trade lawyer. A lot of people in this room are. I think when I read the literature, there are a lot of lawyers who actually come out on both sides of that issue. But I would say that right now, the preponderance of what I've seen is that it's been hard to say that currency is a subsidy because it's not a specific issue. But I'm not saying that there's not a legal case on the other side. So let's just say that it passed. Then, what is the metric you use in order to actually say to China, this is the duty that's going to be on you? The one that Wilbur Ross has suggested, and a lot of other people have suggested, including I remember Chuck Schumer and so forth, is it'll be based on the valuation of that currency. All right. In the past, the GAO did a study about how do you value currency, and they said that basically you take 5 different economists and you'll get 5 different evaluation methods. And all of them will come out differently. The IMF does do valuation of currency, and if there is a subsidy, the WTO will turn to the IMF. The IMF, as of recently, basically said that China's currency is fairly valued. So we'll go through all the steps I've just been talking about in order for us to get a duty on China of 0. So if we're going to focus our relationship with China on trade issues, I would suggest strongly we follow some of the areas that Melanie was talking about. And some of the areas, not all the areas that Rob was talking about. But currency manipulation in China is not the area that I think is going to be the strongest read for us to follow.